Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine the 3rd of August of 2024. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first let's talk about South Donetsk direction. We're going to begin with Vremivka tactical bridgehead. During the previous 24 hours we haven't received lots of updates. We just have some videos of some Russian military activity in this direction that confirms that most likely the Russians are in operational pause. For now, the Russians, as I understand, are waiting for the end of the battle for Konstantinovka, and right after that, the Russians will begin moving further in the northern direction. We have just regular FPV drone activity and nothing more. Now, let's go to Ugledar Konstantinovka direction. We have very interesting details about the situation in the area, and probably the most interesting is the post, the official post of the 79th Airborne Brigade of Armed Forces of Ukraine. They were during the day they were talking a lot about the current situation, about the situation on the ground, about the Russian weapon, about the Ukrainian weapon, what the Russians managed to achieve, what the Ukrainians managed to do, and so on. And there was one interesting post that was published by the 79th Brigade. They were talking about demobilization, not demobilization, but about demilitarization. What does it mean? They were saying that they were promised, the 79th Brigade, the soldiers told us that they were promised to be sent to the mainland, to Kiev, to Lvov, to whatever, after the battle for Konstantinovka. So that means that they're saying that the military authorities of Ukraine, their commander, promised them that when the battle for Konstantinovka is over, they will be sent to, let's say, Zaporozhye, so for some vacation. And what does it mean? That means that the soldiers of 79th Brigade are preparing themselves to abandon their positions in Konstantinovka, so they understand that this is the final hours, maybe the final days of battle for this area, and the most important, they truly believes that they will be demilitarized and sent back home. Of course, this is not going to happen. Of course, the Ukrainians and Ukrainian authorities understand that most likely they will be defeated in Konstantinovka, they will be forced to fall back, but obviously only after the 79th Brigade is going to lose its combat capabilities. Maybe when 10% or 20% of brigade survives, only then they will be sent somewhere to Lvov to recovery. Let's talk about the geolocations. During the previous 24 hours, we got additional videos from the main supply roads that goes from the mainland, from the second line to the line of combat contact. In this video, we can see the Ukrainian fortifications and the trenches between Katerinovka and Konstantinovka itself. The Russians were bombing this territory heavily, and this is very important. Once again, I'll remind you that the Russian DRG, the Russian Sabotage and Reconnaissance Group, are operating much deeper inside of the territory of Ukraine, not, of course, along the line of combat contact. And during the previous days and today and probably in the near future, we're going to receive more and more videos exactly from the deep side, from the deep positions of defense of armed forces of Ukraine. Just for the previous 24 hours on this line, as you can see, we received a lot of geolocations. That was the first one in the vicinity of Vadiana. The Russians were hunting and attacking the Ukrainian tank that the Ukrainians were trying to use to attack the Russians from hidden positions. The tank was discovered and destroyed. And in the vicinity of Bogayavlenka, there was another activity. The Russian reconnaissance drone was flying above the area, and the Russians discovered how the Ukrainians were trying to hide the artillery system, or maybe some communication, some radar. It's very difficult to understand from this angle. Probably it was artillery system they tried to hide, but the Russians saw everything and they destroyed these Ukrainian positions with artillery strike. So the Russians are getting deeper and deeper. Now let's move to Pokrovsk direction. First, we're going to talk about Yasnobrodovka. The Russian sources published the video of how they were hunting and attacking the Ukrainian forces exactly in this area between the Karlovka water reservoir and the village of Yasnobrodovka. This video confirms that this territory is still under complete Ukrainian control. So, summarizing everything, the Ukrainians still control the positions in these tree lines, in these forests along Durna River and Karlovka water reserve. So we have adjusted the map just to confirm, just to show better, more accurate Ukrainian positions. Now let's move to Pokrovsk. We have additional changes. We don't have any, let's say, changes on the ground that were confirmed. We have a lot of changes on the ground that is like contested. So first let's talk about the artillery pocket between Novoselovka, Pershe, Mezhovo, Skuchna and Umanskaya. Today the Russians published the video how they were hunting and attacking the Ukrainian vehicles that were running away as far as possible from the line of combat contact. The Russians discovered them and attacked them. So for now, as you can see, there is no or almost no activity in this area. For some reason, the Russians are not moving further. They're waiting probably when the situation in Zhelana collapses, and only after that they will begin activity or resume activity in this area as well. So basically, there is no even reason to have any activity here, because if the Russians are able to proceed further in the southern directions to Kamyshivka, then the Ukrainians basically would be forced to fall back from this area, and now to attack these territories is just a waste of manpower and time. Now let's talk about the main battles, about Zhelana, Sergeyevka, Veseloe, Ivanovka, Lisichine. First, we're going to talk about Zhelana. During the previous 24 hours, 48 hours, the Ukrainians managed to stabilize the situation more or less. We are not talking about complete stop of the front line. We just start receiving significant number of videos of how the Russians were attacking, hunting, attacking and destroying the Ukrainian Bradley. So the Ukrainians realized that now they can't do anything to stop the Russians. So they probably return back some forces from Kharkiv direction or probably from some other direction, and they're begun using Bradley, Strikers, maybe different tanks, vehicles to counterattack the Russians to slow them down. For example, along the eastern line, the Russians destroyed Bradley that made a lot of brain pain for the Russians. The vehicle was destroyed as a result of 2 or more FPV drone strikes. So for now, according to this situation, the Russians are trying to maintain the line of combat contact between the cemetery in the northern part of the village by the name of Zhelana and the Vulture River. So they're trying to capture everything that located to the top, on top of this red line. So if the Russians are able to do this, then the situation is going to be even worse for the Ukrainians in Zhelana. In the southern part, we have the villages like Novozhelana, Mykolaievka, and we received also lots of geolocations from this direction. In this video, for example, we can see the armored vehicle that was located in the village of Novozhelana. The Russians discovered the position, and the Russians start attacking this vehicle with 2 or more FPV drones. As a result of those attacks, most likely the armored vehicle was destroyed. Another armored vehicle was discovered by the Russians in the same area, and this armored vehicle was also attacked by the Russians. So what does it mean? What all these videos tell us? First of all, and the most important, the Russians during the previous days managed to significantly improve their positions along the railways, and basically the Russians cut Zhelana from supply. There is no supply from these fields. There is water barriers, used to be a very poor quality of the surface of the ground, so the only way how the Ukrainians can send forces is through Novozhelana, and basically through this small intersection of roads. And of course, it's not a very big deal for the Russians to control this territory and to destroy everything that is going in Zhelana direction. In this video, we can see another armored vehicle that was heading to Zhelana and that was attacked by the Russians. So this is the living road, this is the death road. Probably we don't know for sure how long the Ukrainians are able to hold Zhelana, but as long as the Ukrainians are able to hold this territory, the more the Russians will be able to destroy vehicles that are heading in this direction. So, as for different mappers, we have first reports that the Russians entered the village from the northwestern part. There are very heavy clashes along the streets, along the buildings. The reports about the Russians entering the village were received yesterday in the evening, or this, let's say, in the early morning. So, most likely during the 3rd of August, the Russians are able to improve their positions even more, and most likely tomorrow, before the next, let's say, video, we're going to receive additional updates about at least control over this street. So this is our projection, and we'll see what is going to be. Furthermore, different mappers, mainly pro-neutral mappers, of course, and pro-Russian mappers reported about additional progress of armored forces of Russian Federation inside of Sergeyevka. The Russians entered the village, the Russians captured first buildings inside of the village, and the Russians captured the eastern line. The clashes continues. The situation in Sergeyevka is very difficult for the Ukrainians for two reasons. First of all, the road from the north, from let's say Vysole to Sergeyevka, was cut by the Russians according to different mappers, and the road from Novozhelano through Zhelano to the same village was also captured by the Russians. So for now, the Ukrainians can use just the fields, but we understand what kind of reinforcements the Ukrainians in Sergeyevka can expect if they can receive them just through fields. So we can say nothing, nobody will risk. There are lots of probably minefields, so we can start counting days probably before Sergeyevka falls. Vysole, the Ukrainians realized the difficult situation of the Ukrainians in the village of Sergeyevka, and during the previous day they were trying to counterattack the Russians. They were sending reinforcement, and for example in this video we can see the Ukrainian personnel carrier that entered Vysole, and the Ukrainians were trying to land infantry and begin clearing the operation, but the Russians were already there. Russian soldier, let's say, entered the street and attacked Ukrainian personnel carrier with a grenade launcher, and as a result of attack, the Ukrainian personnel carrier was destroyed. So the Ukrainians realized that most likely Vysole fell. Of course, no chances to restore control, and the most important, most likely, there are no chances to restore control over Sergeyevka as well. Now let's move to Ivanovka. There are very heavy clashes in this area. The Russians control just the most southeast part. During the previous day, during the previous 24 hours, the Russian sources published the video how they were bombing the central part of the village with multiple launch rocket systems, and the Russians published the video of another Bradley that was destroyed in the southeastern part. So this is very important. We've just calculated probably from 3 till 5 Bradleys that most likely were destroyed during the previous 24 hours in Ivanovka, in Zhelano, Novozhelano. So as you can see, the Ukrainians suffered significant losses, but I'll remind you that during the previous few weeks we got report that the NATO countries have redeployed, the United States of America have redeployed forces from Germany to Poland with Ukraine and Poland. They redeployed up to 150 fighting infantry vehicles, so most likely the Ukrainians have reserves, and obviously these vehicles were redeployed to the border with the purpose to send them silently one by one on the territory of Ukraine to support without any without any announcement of additional military package or something like this. We have small correction on the line of Vozdvizhenka. The Russian sources published the video how they managed to discover the Ukrainian positions along the tree line, and they attacked their positions with Krasnopol. And so this video confirms that the Ukrainians are still there, and that at least this part of the territory is still in the Ukrainian. So we have adjusted the map. We have shortened the gray zone and contested area in Ukrainian favor. Now let's move further. We have a lot of updates from Toretsk agglomeration. As for New York, nothing, and it's very weird and very interesting situation. We've been talking a lot about the situation in New York along the line of combat contact along Gorlovka. We were talking a lot about cauldrons, about additional Russian progress, but yet we haven't received anything that can confirm the existence of the cauldron, of course, and about the Russian progress. So this can mean few things. First of all, there is nothing like that as we were discussing, or the situation is so critical either for the Russians and for the Ukrainians that the situation requires from both sides the silence. So they requires not to talk a lot and to wait the end of this operation. Maybe the Ukrainians are trying to conduct something like an unblock operation, or the Russians are about to close the hats, or maybe there is something like negotiations when the Russians suggest the Ukrainians to surrender. We don't know for sure. From this direction, we have just one video of how the Russians were FPV droning the Ukrainians in the vicinity of the energy facility that located between the village of Zalizne and Nilipovka. We're talking about the strike, and maybe the Russians also do have some plans right now to move along the road and to move as close as possible to Nilipka itself, if the Russians are able to do this. But there are just fields that are going to be very difficult to conduct. But if the Russians have some solution for this, I don't know, if they're able to do this, then it's obviously going to be a cauldron, and there is no less need even to think about any possibilities for the Ukrainians to escape this situation. Now let's go to Zalizne. We have changes on the ground. The Ukrainian sources published a series of videos of how they were FPV droning the Russian positions in Toretsk agglomeration. There were lots of places, lots of buildings and houses that were attacked by the Ukrainians. Some of them were geolocated, some of them haven't been geolocated, some of them have no value to be geolocated. But the most interesting positions is this one. This is the building that was attacked by the Ukrainian FPV drone, and this is the second building that was attacked, and both buildings improves the Russian positions. Both building improves Russian positions, and based on these videos, most of the mappers, including us, we updated their maps. So the Russians answered the next citadel. This is, by the way, the third citadel. The first citadel was the Terikon of Pivdine. The second citadel was the high-rise building area in the center in Pivnichne, and Terikon landfill of Artyoma is the third citadel that the Russians began assaulting. So, and this is very interesting. The Russians are taking under control citadel by citadel without almost any resistance from the Ukrainian side. It is probably the fastest citadel battles ever since the beginning of the special military operation. So we have additional changes on the ground. Some mappers reported that the Russians also captured the college, Toretsk college, that located in this area. We haven't received any locations that can confirm this, but we will add the contested area to our map. The Russians continue bombing and attacking Toretsk itself with FAB. While the Russians are moving along the line of combat contact, the Russian artillery force and aviation forces are bombing the Ukrainians inside of the 4th and 5th citadel on the outskirts of Toretsk, which obviously are going to be the primary target for the Russians during the next months, maybe in the beginning or by the end of August. Now let's go to Klishchiivka. We have adjusted the map in the vicinity of Klishchiivka in, let's say, gray zone favor. The Russians, as we discussed in the previous video, captured some Ukrainian soldiers during the battle for the 215.7 hill. The area was captured. The Ukrainian soldier was captured exactly in this point, and we got that a lot of pro-Russian mappers have adjusted this territory in favor of gray zone. So we did the same. We did need additional information that can confirm the let's say 100, but that can confirm the 100% sure let's say control by the Ukrainians. Then we will adjust in Ukrainian favor, or if the Russians are able to show something, we will adjust the map in Russian favor. Chasov Yar. We have some changes on the ground, just a short one. The Ukrainian sources published the video. The 23rd Mechanized Brigade published the video of how they were FPV droning the Russians along Seversky Donetsk Donbass Canal. So not very big gains, just a small progress by the Russians, just a small geolocated progress by the Russians. I'll remind you that according to information we have from different mappers, mainly from neutral mappers and pro-Russian mappers, this gray cloud is the progress of the Russians, yet unconfirmed. Pro-Ukrainian sources like Deep State are not talking about this direction at all. So we don't know. According to them, they can't confirm. They still haven't confirmed Russian progress in the central part of Chasov Yar. Now let's go to Razdolovka. The Russians improved their positions, and we have geolocation that confirm complete control over the fields and the fortifications to the north of Razdolovka. The Ukrainians published another batch of FPV drone strikes all over the entire territory of Ukraine, and one of the episodes was geolocated exactly in this point, and based on this video, most of the mappers have adjusted their maps. According to the Russian sources, the Russians managed to enter Razdolovka itself, but not to stop just along this line. And it's logical development of the situation that we've been talking about during the previous few days. I'll just remind you that, for example, this video we got yesterday, how the Russians were conducting artillery preparation of Ukrainian positions along the railways. Then the Russians began assault operation. This video was published on the 1st of August. On the 2nd of August, we got the video of how the Russians were bombing the Ukrainian positions along the railways, how the Russians were attacking, and now we have the video how the Russians improved their position. So obviously, everything is completely correct. The Russians are moving, and most likely the Russians did answer Perezhny itself, and we just haven't received geolocations to correct the map. But in a day or in a two, somebody will adjust adjust, some reliable resource will adjust the map, and we will add contested area. The Russians are trying to resume their offensive along the railways towards the village of Vesele. So the Russians began artillery preparation by bombing the 8 Ukrainian positions with heavy artillery strikes, and let's see, maybe the next few days there are going to be some movements, another attempt to attack of Sons of Anarchy. Now let's talk about, let's say, stronghold to the east of Verkhnyokamyansk. The Russian sources published the video of how they were trying to clear the roads of attack in the southern direction. During the previous probably 2 years, the Russians made lots of attempts to attack this stronghold, and mainly the Russians were attacking this stronghold, of course, from the east. The Russians were attacking using significant number of armored vehicles, and as you know, the Russians suffered significant losses during those attempts. The Russians were attacking from the north, and due to the fact that those attempts didn't give any results, now the Russians are trying to clear the road of attack from Ivano-Darivka and Sporne, but from the southern to the northern direction. As soon as the Russians are able to clear the roads to destroy Ukraine's strongholds, they will make more attempts, and most likely this stronghold will fall. Now let's talk about Kupinsk area. Very interesting details are coming from Makeivka. The Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were FPV droning another building inside of the village. We've used this video to correct the map, but today we got report that a lot of mappers have adjusted this part of Makeivka now in Ukrainian favor. We haven't received any updates that can confirm the Russian presence in this part, and now the mappers began changing the map back in Ukraine. We are not going to do this for now. We are going to wait for additional geolocations, and then we will change the map in Ukraine favor. For now, we're keeping everything as is. Now let's talk about Kupinsk direction. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian logistic. For now, during the previous 24 hours, there were no attempts from the Russian side to change the situation on the ground. The Russians were bombing the Ukrainian warehouses, ammo depots. The Russians were bombing bridges once again. The Russians were bombing different communication equipment, and the Russians were bombing dam in Petropavlovka. I don't know the reason of this attack. Maybe they're trying to ruin logistic, but obviously you can't ruin logistic by destroying at least this dam. So anyway, the situation remains the same, but the Russians are trying to improve their own positions and to let's say reduce Ukrainian logistic possibilities. Northern Kharkiv direction. Telling the truth, we are receiving lots of very interesting updates. You know that we discussed the situation. As for geolocations, as for changes on the ground, no changes on the ground, of course. As for geolocations, significant number of Russian flamethrower strikes, Russian aviation bombs, so everything as we saw yesterday, before yesterday, and probably a month ago. And no changes on the ground. But today we continue getting additional changes in the way how the group of forces north, let's say, report about the current situation on the ground. And today, if you remember, we've talked this situation yesterday in the previous update. The Russians, as for the group of forces north, they are saying that since the beginning of this Kharkiv offensive operation, the group of forces north continue, let's say, clearing the Kharkiv area, creation of the buffer zone, and different things, different words that describe Russian offensive operation. Starting off yesterday, the group of forces north reported that during the, let's say, 1st or 2nd of August, the Russians continue defense operation. So they changed the words, and of course it changed the entire situation, the entire things that are happening there. And today the group of forces north changed their statement once again. But as for today, the statement was very weird. Let's take a look at the statement. On August 2, the North group of forces continued to destroy the numerically superior forces of Ukrainian armed forces in Kharkiv direction. So they're trying to tell us that Ukrainians have concentrated so much forces, so many soldiers, armored vehicles, tanks in northern direction. So maybe the Ukrainian army is multiple times more bigger than Russian one. And following this report, I see, telling the truth, it's my opinion, it doesn't mean that it's right or correct information, I see a small panic between the Russians who are preparing this post. most likely something big and something interesting conducted by the Ukrainians is going to happen in this direction, and this is going to happen very, very soon. Maybe the situation, maybe the when this happens is the days are already numbered. Anyway, that's it about the situation on the ground, and we have additional reports from Kiev. Very interesting reports. The sources are saying that at least, for example, there was a report at least 2 Ukrainian military vehicles were burned in Kiev tonight. One in Kharkiv highway, the other in Pechora district. Local resources complain that the number of such cases is growing. So they know that basically somebody is trying to set Ukraine on fire. Somebody is trying to show an example. And maybe at the beginning of these fire parties in Ukraine, the Russian special services and forces were responsible for first vehicles that were set on fire and burned. But now obviously we can make a conclusion that the local Ukrainians whose friends, relatives died during the special military operation that were, say, forcibly mobilized by Ukraine are trying to revenge. This is the real resistance, because today we got report that the number of vehicles that have been destroyed and burned by Ukrainian resistance is already more than 100, and the number is growing and rising every day, because this is the only way how to stop mobilization. Because the recruiters are not going to mobilize you if they don't have vehicle. They can't capture you and then they can't move you for another 20-30 kilometers from this point to the recruitment center. They can't do this. So for now, this is the easiest and the simplest way how to stop mobilization, to destroy the Ukrainian vehicles. So this is, for example, the post. An interesting story is developing in Kiev. The number of burned Ukraine armed forces vehicles hacks exceeded 100, and it's growing every day. The not TCC, it's like not recruiters stickers, and 24-hour security do not help. So the Ukrainians of recruiters try to get signs on their cars saying that this is not from recruiters, this is just regular military forces or police cars or something like this, and as you can see, it doesn't help. The security is being hammered, the car is being burned. Is in this mode, Kiev ultras will come to the Maidan quite soon, and the martial law will have to be introduced in the city in the coming weeks. And this is telling the truth, is correct information. If the Ukrainians are not able to stop this process, obviously this process is going to grow more and more, and sooner or later the Ukrainians will be forced to set martial law in the cities, and maybe to allow the Ukrainians to be on the streets just from morning till evening, but not till late night. Obviously this is going to happen. The question is when exactly. And of course everybody is waiting for additional development of the situation in the Middle East, and today we got some development. The British embassy has also joined in and is calling on its citizens to leave Lebanon immediately. The first statement was made, the first announcement was made by the US embassy in the Lebanon, has called on American citizens to leave the country by any means possible, and this is serious evidence of the reality of a major war in the Middle East. At the same time, the State Department warns that in the events of a crisis, you should not rely on it, and you should only rely on yourself. So there is like 99% that something bad is going to happen in Lebanon. We still haven't received any reports about any attempts from Iran to counterattack the Western countries, but obviously the answer is going to come very soon. The only thing I can tell you about the situation, that poor Lebanon and poor the citizens of this country, because most likely this destiny of Gaza Strip is going to be, the Lebanon is going to face the destiny of Gaza Strip, and most likely this small country would be reduced to ruins as a result of special operation that Israelis are going to conduct. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.